this camera's it constantly turns like this as well, so like you can
Don't you have a camera that can move around? No, it's like a webcam thing.
yeah.
Oh, Zoom.
You know,
Hey,
Hey, dude, how you doing?
2 hours of sleep. What's up?
Oh, bless you,
Hey,
bro.
man.
We wrapped at 4 a.m.
Hey guys,
4 a.m.
we'll just
they can hear all that, just so you know.
Cool. We're talking shop, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to us here, which is what we're going to do for 45 minutes. So get used to it.
That's good.
Yeah.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, plan B.
Don't they do a lot of stuff? with
that
24?
will take you off your video.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Well, because we're gonna have the cameras.
Okay, and what video? You just want audio.
Well, we can see.
I'll just-
You need to.
respect.
I've got you linking on the calendar.
All right, welcome back to the Disruptive Storyteller Workshop. If you're just joining us, I'm David Noronha, co-founder of BCA and head of screenwriting. And I'm really excited about this next session because I'm joined by, as I said before, my creative partners in crime and good friends. I've got my co-founder, dean, and head of drama, Fabiano Altamora. What's up, Fab? How are you, man?
Good, bro. How are you? It's good to see your face.
You too, man. We've also got film program director and indie filmmaker, Kendall Bryant. Kenny, what's up?
Hey, how you doing?
Good, man, good. And finally, last but not least, editor and colorist extraordinaire, Ryan Braun.
Going, man.
Right, good to see you. So guys, if you're just joining us, we're actually this is really cool because we've never got a chance to do this. In fact, this has kind of been a dream on our hearts for a while. We kind of envisioned for a long time a podcast where we got together to talk about this stuff. So think of this as the pilot episode of BCA's Storyteller Corner podcast. So gents, as you well know, because we've been talking about it for the last couple of weeks, we're actually going to be diving into a film that I'm excited to chat about called Minari. And it's the story of a Korean immigrant family, the Yi family. In 1983, they moved from California to their new plot of land in rural Arkansas, where the father, Jacob, hopes to grow Korean produce to sell to vendors in Dallas. As you guys know, this thing got, just nominated for awards around the world, including 6 Oscars, Best Picture, Best Director, Best Original Score, Original Screenplay, Best Actor, Yoon Rai. I'm sure you recognize him because I know you're into zombies from The Walking Dead. And Best Supporting Actress. She's kind of like the Meryl Streep of Korea. And her name is, forgive my Korean, Yoo Jung-yoon. She won for Best Performance by an Actress in a Supporting Role. So this thing, guys, that's the basic premise. And you know the title of this thing, it's called The Disruptive Storyteller. And I asked these guys, each of them has a really unique lens. Rai looking at it from the technical, editorial, color side. Kenny from the filmmaking and cinematography side. Fab from the acting perspective. Myself from story. Fab, I'm going to come to you first. I know that the topic is disruptive storytelling, but before we even dive into that, man, you and I chatted just briefly yesterday. What was your impression of the acting in Minari?
It was, like I remember saying to you yesterday, I felt like a bystander, not an audience member. It felt so unbelievably immersive. The acting was so naturalistic that I didn't feel like I was watching a movie, specifically with the grandma. I mean, she was just incredible. It was like, it's one of those things that you think, oh, these have had no training because they're so natural. Yet to be so incredibly natural and refined on camera, you have to have tremendous training. So as you said, she's like a Meryl Streep. She was just unbelievable, specifically when she got to the point of having the stroke. Like it was unbelievable. And the child reminded me of a kid in Lion. You know,
yeah, Alan S. Kim. Yeah, I think he plays, his character's 5 years old, but he might be a little bit older than that. What did you think about him?
I thought he was incredible. Kenny jokingly said he was 21, playing a 5-year-old. But no, he was, I just thought he was incredible. Such an amazing actor. The same with the wife, the same with the lead actor, and the same with the daughter. The cast was flawless. Even the American cast, they were flawless.
Yeah, I love Will Patton. I love Will Patton. He's one of those actors that, actors say, he's in everything. He's in everything. Off the top of my head, I don't know that I could list 2 or 3 of them, but I feel like I've spent my life watching this guy. And we're going to come back to him because his character, I believe, highlights some of those kingdom elements, which I think is pretty cool. We're going to keep talking about all 3 or 4 of the disciplines. But Kenny, I'm curious, man, from a filmmaking perspective, you have Lee Isaac Chung, who is Korean American, I believe. I can't recall off the top of my head if his parents were the first generation over or whether he was born here in the States, but he's both the writer and director. I'm curious, man, from a visual standpoint, from a directorial standpoint,
Right.
what crossed your mind as you watched Minari?
Well, yeah, and then the cinematographer was Lachlan Milne. He's Australian. He actually worked on a couple episodes of Stranger Things, so he's definitely a cool cinematographer. But what I loved about it the most is how unintrusive the camera was. I mean,
Wow, what a
you didn't
great
know
word,
it was there.
unintrusive. What do you mean by that, man?
You know, for me, the best cinematography is the cinematography you don't notice. And if it pulls away from the story, if it pulls us out of the story because the camera's too shaky or it's moving too much or it's not moving enough, the camera is as big a part of the storytelling as any other part of the story. And the choices that they made together, the director and the cinematographer, were absolutely brilliant. I mean, I was actually really stunned. There were some gorgeous wide shots. And it reminded me a little bit of Terrence Malick's style. Where
Oh, yeah.
all the scenery, you saw the world that was so large in comparison to the characters in the story. But then there were these beautiful, still center framed shots all throughout. I don't know if I've seen that many center frame shots in a long, long time where the characters were perfectly centered. And man, they were beautiful. Just drew your eyes straight to the character, straight to the story, everything that was happening. Yeah, just an absolutely gorgeous film. Oddly enough, those kinds of films don't get nominated for cinematography very often, but to us storytellers, we notice the expertise in the way that they executed it. So
That's beautifully said, man. It's funny because I already see a theme, and I'm curious to see what Rye says here in a second, but I see a theme developing. Fab, you mentioned how naturalistic, subtle the acting is. I hear Kenny saying how unintrusive that the cinematography and the filmmaker isn't calling attention to himself or herself, right? Going to editorial and to color, things that maybe lesser technical people don't necessarily notice, although they're noticing it all the while because they're actually watching it. I'm curious, from your perspective as a filmmaker as well, on the kind of post-production side, what were your thoughts as you watched Minari?
yeah, I mean, I completely agree with these two about how beautiful the subtleties were in the film. I think that's one of the things when I watched it, I realized that the editor was actually, I use the word soft touches, but sometimes, in editorial, we're the last chain in the process. And what you could tell the editor was doing was he was set up from cinematography and set up from the director, right? And his job was, it was honestly stitching together the film more than it was, I think, discovering a lot in the edit, because I think it had been so meticulously set up from the director and the cinematographer. But I think honestly, both the way that the colorist worked on the film, David Cole, he did such a great job. I think one of the things they're trying to do is make this thing feel stylistic, and keep it true to have the 80s feel. But at the same time, it's all about these soft touches, right? So with the edits, like Kenny said, these wide shots, right? And they would just hold on these shots. And it actually allowed you to, I think, like what Fab said, as a viewer, you were choosing where to look in the image. And I think that as an editor, there's a beautiful tension sometimes, because we sometimes want to cut to what we think people want to see versus holding on a shot and letting the rest of the team's work kind of speak for itself, both the acting and the cinematography. And I think this film did a great job of balancing between not being too pacey, not too cutting, and allowing what had come before with the shots they chose, how they chose to shoot things, expose things, and just really sit inside of moments. And I think it honestly reveals the characters really well by the pace of the film.
Wow, so I'm hearing the word naturalistic, unobtrusive. I'm hearing soft touches. I'm by no means an expert, neither in Asian culture or Asian filmmaking, but I watched some BTS stuff with Lee Isaac Chung and also with Steven Yeun. There was actually this really beautiful, really thoughtful and reflective kind of interview with J.J. Abrams, which I highly recommend everybody to check out. And maybe Ella and the team can actually post some of the BTS stuff later, but just kind of staying up at night, late at night, and just kind of poking around. I was struck by the kind of softness of speech, the kind of precision of speech by the writer-director Lee Isaac Chung, how he spoke about the film. And, from the little that I know about Asian culture, there's just real intentionality in gesture. If you look at art, just in general, Asian art, if we think about rock gardens and how, there's this thought about less is more, and how you can have an entire garden, just raked in these patterns, and how that causes us to kind of just become still and to think. I was kind of struck by, I was wondering if this film kind of echoes that aspect of Asian culture. And I don't know if it's specifically Korean per se, but this idea of just small gestures, little things move to the left and the right, or just even the thought of just one gesture. Here's one compositional idea that we're just, I don't know if you guys remember that shot. Remember when the dad is digging the well and David, the son, and it's Kenny, do you remember the shot where it's like a high and wide overhead angled down? You know the one that I'm talking about, right? And he tells him to yell because they found water, and the little boy's kind of reserved it for, I think it's a oneer, right? They just park on that shot, and it's about a father kind of calling his son to kind of let out his inner lion or tiger.
Right.
Do you guys recall, Kenny, do you recall any other shots or moments specifically that struck you maybe from the filmmaking side?
Yeah, there's another shot like that where they're outside the little chicken plants, and it's a wide shot on the.
Oh yeah.
Remember that one? It's one up against the building, and he's talking to him about how the male chickens, the son says, "What's that smoke coming out of the stack?" And the son says, the father says, "Those are the male chickens. They're not worth anything. So we have to make sure that we're worth something."
Yeah.
And it's kind of what the whole story is about, right? Where you have this Korean father whose goal is to find the American dream,
Yeah.
and how it's in conflict with a lot of what the mother wants, which is security. And she cares about her family, and specifically her son, who has this heart condition. And it was just so beautiful. And they sat on that wide shot, like Ryan said, so often they would sit on these wide shots forever, it felt like. And it was so beautiful. It was calming. It brought you into the story and the characters without pulling you out of it. And I just loved it. I watched that scene multiple times over and over. Yeah.
It's funny how simple can be powerful. All right, so Kenny, thank you for doing that, because you actually brought up, I watched another BTS video that laid out the 5 themes, as this one particular individual saw it, the 5 themes that the film starts to explore. And Kenny, you hit the first one, which is to be useful.
Yeah.
Be useful. Which seems, honestly, and I know many of us come from immigrant backgrounds. My background is Cuban American. Kenny, you have Mexican American, I believe Native American. Fab, you're Italian, British. We're all immigrants here in the States in some way, shape, or form of Midwest stock over there. But there is this kind of immigrant notion that one of the highest values, one of the most important things you can be, having come to this country, is useful. I'm going to lay out the other 4 themes, and would love to hear kind of, actually, how about this? The first one is be useful. What are the themes, Ryan, what other themes kind of came out for you that you noticed?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think was the most intriguing and probably impactful for me was the father-son dynamic. I think, I don't know if we can call that a theme, but I think one of the things that I felt walking away was a little bit of the father in, he's struggling with his own, trying to become something, and, with the one scene in the hospital where he's telling his wife, like, I want my kids to see me succeed at something. I think that in the film, you watch this beautiful little dance of, you can even see with how they place these shots of David, the son, where he was looking off and he was observing, right? And I think that there's this thing of going, the son was watching. He's like,
yes,
he's learning. He's picking up on what it looks like to be a man, what it looks like to be useful. And at the end, I think it's so beautiful where they have this wide shot, and it's the father coming in, looking at the Minari plant that's going next to the stream, whatever. And as everyone's kind of come to a place of reconciliation, of understanding of like what their values are, it's a scene where it ends on the father and the son. And I feel like you just get this thing of that eventually the son is going to want to be like his dad, because his dad is learning to make the best decisions that he can, which is
That's so good, man.
family overrides, you know, his personal dreams. And so they played this tension of you don't understand that that's happening until the very end. And I think that it's honestly it's beautifully done because it wasn't on the nose, and you honestly have to kind of take it as a viewer and lean into that. So
Yeah, it's almost like you have to discover it. Fab, I'm going to come to you in a second here, man. I think you hit, you know, one of the things that we teach at BCA and all of our programs is that we're all storytellers. And as I laid out in that first session, gents, you've heard this message before, you know, we are sons and daughters of a storyteller God. And I think what Kenny and I teach in the filmmaking program, in the screenwriting program, Fab, I know what we go after are these kingdom principles and these kingdom themes that show up in all kinds of kingdom storytelling. And I think we're going to be highlighting over the next few minutes before we get into the disruptive storytelling part, which I'm excited to dive into too. Fab, I'm curious, man, from the acting, storytelling, any perspective that you have, what other themes kind of resonated for you as a man, an artist, father?
Yeah, I think it was significance, right? You know, the significance of the father wanting to make a difference for his family to become self-sustaining. So they weren't having to do the same, you know, the same job over and over again. He wanted to make something for himself, I think, because he wanted to show his kids that he was significant. And there's that scene, isn't there, in the hospital where he chooses the farm over his family. Now, that's no commentary on, you know, on choosing family over work, but it shows that he needed to have validation in what he was doing as a man. So what he did was very important to him. So it formed part of his identity, right? And
yes,
I think as the movie progressed, specifically towards the end, where his wife said, I need security, I can't keep doing this, I've lost faith in you.
Ooh, I know that moment. I don't know how did that affect you, bro?
Oh, it was hard, man. Because you think as a man, you do things because you want to leave a legacy for your family. It's not just about selfish ambition. There was nothing about what he did that I felt was selfish ambition. It
Well
was about
said, yeah.
trying to leave a legacy for his family and for his kids. And yes, when you're tilling the ground, in effect, that must be something to do with, you know, the hardness of excavating for this farm to plant new life. There's themes throughout the story that, you know, pertain to the farm, right? But when she said, I've lost my faith in you, you could see his heart being ripped away. And then when he loses everything at the end from the accident of his mother-in-law setting it on fire, you realize then that significance isn't in just what you do, it's in the family and people around you, right? It's your identity is based in your community and your family and who you are in him. And I thought it was amazing. There was just another side as well. I love the comedy in it, where the son is definitively American and Korean. And when the grandma comes into the room, says it smells Korean. And I just thought that the way they intertwine both cultures and the way the Korean and the American kind of intertwined was so beautiful.
Yeah, it was quintessentially immigrant. There were so many moments that even though clearly I'm not Asian, I'm Cuban American, resonated with me. Like part of my memories, which is going to be a theme we're going to talk about here in a second, memories and how this story was developed by Lee Isaac Chung, because I found this incredible little bit of trivia in this interview with J.J. Abrams. Honestly, many of my memories are based around smell. I have memories, and I'm sure we can all think about this, whether it's mom, grandma, whatever it is, right? Whether it's, you know, grandpa smelling funky. But my grandmother, when I think of my grandmother, Judith, it is intertwined with the scent of mangoes, with Cuban coffee. I mean, every morning began with espresso in the silver little thing. Fab, I know you recognize these, right? 100%. Very, very dark and sweet. Still how I like my coffee these days. But it's So here's what's interesting. So here are the 5 themes that are laid out, and then I want to ask you guys a little bit. We're going to start segueing into disruptive, but check this out. So in one of the analyses of the film, they say these are the 5 themes: to be useful, come home, the idea of returning home or coming home, family, which we've talked about all in some way, shape, or form, whether it's husband, wife, father, son. Then intergenerational or connection between generations is explored, right? You have mother, daughter, you've got grandchild, grandmother, right? I mean, from all different angles, intergenerational. And Lee, the director, Lee Isaac Chung, actually talks about, and I thought this was so progressive and edgy in a really cool Kingdom way, where he talks actually about how currently there is a break between generations and how sad that is. And that part of his heart, check out this kind of Kingdom intention, was to highlight how integral and important connection between generations is, how we miss out. I mean, certainly it's common at Bethel to talk about the exchange and the impartation between one generation and the other. But I think if we look out at the world today, we see how that break is affecting the ability of the next generation to actually, Fab, what do you think of it?
Yeah, it's legacy, right, brother, isn't it? You know,
That's right.
It's learning from each of the generations previously. It's not saying mine is the one that only makes sense, because I think we've gone from legacy mindset to vending machine mindset. What can I get instantaneously? You know, it has no lasting thing. A watch you buy for $70, you throw it away. Rather than what does legacy mindset do? I like this watch commercial. It's by a maker called Patek Philippe. And he says, you never really own a Patek Philippe. You only save it for the next generation. So in their construction of watches, they're already thinking legacy. And I think that's what I loved about this. The generational aspect is it's legacy that we have to communicate.
Wow. So good. So check this out. Well said, man. Because the next generation limits itself. In fact, the older generation limits itself. We all cut ourselves off from that cumulative inheritance, that cumulative inheritance between generations. The last one is loss of faith, which we've talked about, and we see the loss of faith kind of explored in many different from many different perspectives. Kenny, what did you pick up on this theme before we segue into disruptive storytelling? Just real quick, thoughts on loss of faith and how the film deals with the concept of loss of faith?
Yeah, loss of faith. Yeah. Well, first, I just love how they show faith. They show it kind of a little crazy, a little, southern crazy. You got the Paul who's carrying his cross every Sunday. I mean, that was just brilliant. I just loved how they portrayed it, because it was a very honest, genuine way of portraying it, and it's how a lot of the world actually sees faith. But it's also redeemed, because it's also the place where the mother especially wanted to find a church for connection and for her family. It's also the one person that actually stuck with him from the very beginning, Paul. And so as crazy as he was with all the antics, he was the one that was there at the home to, perform an exorcist on the home, But it was genuine. It was funny. It was genuine. You felt like he actually cared. As crazy as he was, he actually cared. And then, of course, you watch the father who's going through the entire journey from the beginning to the end.
You have the whole spectrum, right? You have the wild Pentecostal who clearly, and by the way, what I loved about it is how implicit and subtle the dialogue was. It was just through character. There wasn't a lot of commentary. There wasn't any kind of hard hitting on the nose kind of stuff. It's just like, here it is. You got wild Pentecostal all the way through the father, who seems to have walked away from the church. And I love how it presents authentically the kind of the spectrum of faith. And with the wife almost kind of at the middle, she seems to be like the fulcrum, as most women, if we're honest, gentlemen, right? Our wives are kind of holding us. I mean, certainly that's the way it works in my house. My wife was the one who led me to the Lord in many ways, and somehow they're able to hold, I'll speak for myself, maybe my skepticism or doubt at times, or this kind of pragmatic male thing with this tender-hearted affection for Jesus. the way that the wife is, all the way to the wild Pentecostal dude. All right, so I need to, one real quick tidbit, check this out. Did you know that Lee Isaac Chung developed this brilliant screenplay based on 80 memories from his childhood?
Wow, that's amazing.
How cool is that? He went through his childhood. You feel it, right? You feel that there's just something very real and odd and quirky about and beautiful as well of these little specific. And then he told JJ Abrams his mind was kind of blown. He's like, wait, but where was the narrative? And he said, it developed over time, but I started with 80 memories, which, by the way, sounds, again, I'm not an Asian expert, but it sounds quintessentially Asian. It feels almost like narrative haiku or something. All right, gents. Yeah. So this is the topic we've been buzzing around, and I know this is the question we've been wrestling with. I want to toss out a quick concept, a quick working definition, and then I'll be unpacking it later with our global gang here. I'll deep dive into disruptive storytelling. But for the sake of this particular conversation, let me throw out a working definition, and then would love to hear your thoughts. Ryan, I'll come to you first. All right, so if you look at the word disruptive, at the heart of that word, the root of that word is rupt. It's where we get the word interrupt, disrupt, and rupture. And it turns out that it means to break or burst. And Holy Spirit kind of reminded me of the wineskin. It almost has that sense to it. Sure. How the wineskin can't hold, the old wineskin can't hold new wine. So if I threw out to you that an interruptive story simply pauses the conversation for a second, but then when that person or that event or that movie or that story leaves the room, if you will, we continue in the same old conversation. That's interruptive storytelling. And if I told you that disruptive storytelling, the difference is that it doesn't allow us to continue the conversation as we've been having it before. Yeah. Right. In your eyes, from your perspective, and we don't need to agree on this, we'd love to hear everybody from their own angle. Is this a disruptive story? And if so, to you personally, how so?
It's a great question, man. I think there's disruptive elements that I found for sure. I think, it's interesting. I was telling these guys before we started, this isn't a film that my wife didn't watch with me because it's not her jam. We're more of a reality TV type, but
listen, confess it right here. Confess it among your brothers. You like The Bachelor, and that's okay. I still respect you.
But it's interesting. As I hit play on this movie, I felt, I talked about with the father-son dynamic, and even with the generational stuff, right? I think as soon as you become a parent, you start to realize what's come before you, what's coming after, and you find yourself in these moments all throughout, parenthood. I started to lean into these moments of, there's so many parallels to my personal life, even to go, I'm not American Asian, and this beautiful, it was very much a snapshot of what it would be like to be in their shoes. I found myself going, for instance, most impactful thing was the father-son relationship. I kept going, at the end of the day, at the end of a trial or hardship, even the way that the kids watch their parents argue, right? The thing that felt disruptive to me was you can't watch this film and not analyze is probably not the right word, but I would say at some level, just look at maybe some of your own personal, put your life out and go, okay, am I doing that in the same way? And am I actually finding redeeming qualities when I do have an argument with my wife, right? What happens and how does my family feel impacted? Or, maybe they don't, maybe we do it in a really healthy way, right? And so for me, the disruption part was, it felt like, David, you said this, it felt so, like the dialogue and stuff, it wasn't forced, it wasn't pushed. And what it was an invitation for me as a viewer to go, well, I almost like this is some of the movies I always feel most impacted by was, will I take the invitation, the subtle invitation to learn what this director is just kind of dropping these nuggets in, and will I allow those things to impact me? I think for me, I'll walk away from those films more often than not feeling impacted and having questions that I will, the big budget, whatever, these are the movies where I go, I want to have this legacy, whatever. So
I'm
I want
hearing
some
you
stuff to
say,
happen.
yeah, so I'm hearing you say that it, in a sense, disrupted, stopped perhaps the conversation, the internal conversation about maybe how, in some small, subtle ways, you're a great dad, and you've got a growing family, man. And I know you to be a great husband and a great dad. And yet I hear you say that it invited you, which I love that word. I love the subtlety and the partnership of that word of invitation versus kind of this preaching methodology that sometimes comes across in faith-based films, that it invited you to reconsider. It disrupted maybe the way that you were looking in some small ways, your family and so on and so forth. Fab, how about you, man? Do you see this film as disruptive, and how so?
Yeah, it's interesting. A film can propagate, it can invite, right? I think for me, it's the same as Ryan. It makes you look at where you are currently with your family, and it asks the question, am I focusing on the farm or am I focusing on the family? And can you do both? And when I create the farm, am I inviting my family into the farm, into my work, or is my work compartmentalized and my family compartmentalized? And if so, how can I unify them? Right. And I think that's so important. And it's so funny, just on a side note, I was watching Father of the Bride the other day, and I couldn't finish it because it's so close to home with my daughter at that age range. And I started to feel like emotionally, like how I was hyperventilating. And this as well, it's like what memories he created with his son on that small lot of land in Arkansas. Am I making those memories with my family now in everything that I do? And it causes me to, engage with the conversations. If I'm not, I better do it, because they're going to get old soon, and I'm not going to be able to look back and change it. So I change it now. And that's how it was disruptive for me.
That's huge, man. I mean, listen, for a story, for 2 hours, 90 minutes, 2 hours, for a filmmaker to do it with such excellence in craft and invite, listen, if it's happening to you and it's happening to Ryan, and it certainly happened to me, can you imagine that this storyteller has actually potentially caused millions of people to reconsider how they approach family? If that's not kingdom storytelling, then I don't know what is, man.
Yeah. Exactly. And you know what, as well, they didn't criticize the Christian faith. They didn't push the Christian faith. And Will Patton, when you thought he might be a little bit crazy, he wasn't a villain. They did everything with such finesse and with a ton of panache, right? It was just classy, really classy, man.
Listen, another cool tidbit about Will Patton, because I thought there was such authenticity to his portrayal, even when he's speaking in tongues, and Stephen Yeun's character's reaction to that, just brilliant and awesome. But I'm like, I actually had the thought, he's actually speaking in tongues. So check this out. I think, if I've gotten my research right, Bill Patton's dad is not just a creative, he's a pastor.
Wow.
He's actually a pastor. So I think he was potentially channeling maybe his own faith. I don't want to over speculate, but also his father. You know what I was struck by, Kenny? I'm going to come to you on the disruptive point. And guys, viewers, I don't know about you, but I'm so stoked about this conversation. I think we're going to go at least 5 minutes over on this, so you're going to have a slightly shorter break. But listen, because this is the podcast that's about to come your way, and I can't wait to do this every week. But you know what I was struck by, guys? And maybe it's because I don't think this is a groundbreaking idea, but it's something that washed over me as I watched the film, is that it felt like a parable. Or maybe, and I've never thought about this before, it felt like a series of interwoven parables. Because our Lord, one of the like two things that he talked about was farming and money. It was like investment banking and farming was what Jesus, almost all his stories were about, if you think about it in modern terms. And maybe it was some of the characters, maybe, of course, it was the character of Bill Patton, and, the conversation around faith in the church. And there were some really sweet moments in the church where they had the awkward moment of having to stand up, and they're welcomed as the only Asians in the church, which was awesome and so sweet that the church does that. And yet we all know how awkward that moment is. But I was struck by how potentially what Lee, the director, did was to to potentially create either an extended parable or a series of episodic parables that explored many different topics. You know, the Lord always kind of told us one parable at a time on one specific theme, but I've never thought about this, that maybe what the writer director did was to create a meta or a longer narrative parable by interweaving various parables that all moved and ebbed and flowed. Kenny, talk to me about your perspective. Was this disruptive for you? Do you see it as a disruptive film? And how so?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we always talk about as a filmmaker, if I can leave the audience a question or a handful of questions at the end of the film, I feel like I've succeeded. I don't have to give them the answers. And I think that this was one of the most brilliant films I've seen in a long time about not giving us all the answers. The most impactful for me was probably the generational theme. Me being the oldest person in the room, maybe I'm thinking about that more, but just this grandmother that came in and the little boy is constantly saying she's not the typical grandma. He comes in, she's cussing during games, she's teaching him games, basically teaching him the Asian poker. And she doesn't make cookies, and she makes this broth that that's just awful to the kid. But then the relationship that develops, and what she brings to the story is what's missing from the parents. She actually tells the boy he's strong. She's the one that tells him his heart isn't as weak as they're telling him it is. So true. And then you see this beautiful exchange where he is getting better and she's getting sicker.
Yes, that's a good point.
And it actually transitions to now we're dealing with a generation that's getting sicker, and how do we handle them? What do we do with them? And then finally, just to keep it brief, just the scene where she accidentally burns the barn down and she's walking down the road away from the family, and the two children are chasing after her. And it was so subtle, but did you guys see the little boy running for the first time? I mean, normally American movies would bring the music in there, and the boy's running, and it'd be sweeping, and the cameras would be coming in, and they would try to build up the emotion. But the way he just sat on it, said nothing, had no commentary with the camera, the direction of the shot. Just we watched a little boy chasing his grandmother and saying that she's still part of the family. Yeah, gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous.
God, Kenny, that is so perceptive, man. I didn't pick up on that, but I love what you've just put out there. You said many beautiful things, but the one that's kind of wrecking me and shaking me right now is that we're faced with both healing and sickness at the same time. You know, as a family, we're reading through the Bible right now. I'm in the book of Job, which is about a dude who's going through a really rough patch in life. He's kind of saying to God, like, hey, can you explain this suffering? And so the idea that there's healing and suffering and sickness at the same time, and the reality, that like the honesty of that idea is such a beautiful thing that you put out there. Guys, real quick, popcorn to each of you. Any parting insights or thoughts? Fab, I'm going to be coming to you for just a quick impartation or blessing over as people take this break. But, you know, Ryan, Kenny, Fab, popcorn around. Any last parting insights that struck you about this film that you want to highlight for us?
Yeah, I think we have to take it as a model and look at how we want to communicate story, right? Like a lot of story now feels like it's trying to propagate something, you know, even within the church. But how do we tell? You and I were talking about it at lunch yesterday. How do we actually take a story and just let it speak for itself? Because a lot of things at the moment feel like they've got to have some form of agenda unto something, rather than let's communicate, open the conversation, like, you know, whether it be a cautionary tale, whether it be whatever it be in the frame of storytelling, but like, let's just open up a conversation. Let's not degrade somebody to elevate somebody. You know, let's not make something clinical, sanitize it. This was just beautiful in the sense that it was so simplistic, yet to arrive at that simplicity, it's very, very complex to do that. And it takes a tremendous amount of artistry. But if we can get back to movies like this that feel simple and really engage in conversation, because as we said yesterday, it isn't plot driven, it's completely character driven. and you invest and you have buy-in with the characters there, and then you reflect, you self-reflect and go, what am I doing? What am I not doing?
Yeah.
How can I change? And that's what I think the motive of story is, right? The conversation of how does it affect me and how can I change my life and how can I change the life of others around me, right?
Gosh, man, that's beautiful. And what I want to highlight in what you're saying, because I think it's so important that people think about this, especially writers, artists of all kinds, is the idea that this story gives the viewer space. So many stories are so overwhelming. They don't actually give you space to think or to even process because you're being told. And by the way, I think both the church and the world, whether it's a Michael Bay film, I don't want to knock Michael Bay, but you know what I'm saying? It's like there's so many exclamation points and it's so overwhelming and bombastic that even if there were something to think about, and in most films there isn't, I don't have space to process that. And I hear you say that the elegance of this film, the power of this film, is it asked questions that gave me space to actually think as I watch. Kenny, what are you thinking, man? What parting ideas do you want to highlight for the viewers?
I'm going to go a little bit different here. I wanted to say that it doesn't take $200 million to make a world-changing film.
Yeah.
This is actually ultra low.
Well said, man. Well said.
Of Hollywood films. I think it only cost $2 million. Shot it in Oklahoma. They shot it in a trailer house. The barn.
Are you kidding me? $2 million for this film?
$2 million budget, yeah, and it made 14.2 million already. If you want to talk, returns on investment. But then they have the real trailer, they have the real land that they shot on, and then they had the real barn that they actually burnt, and they had one chance to capture it.
Wow.
So, I mean, just beautiful storytelling. It speaks to pre-production, it speaks to planning, and they shot it in 28 days. So
I heard that, which is stunning, And Lee, the director, Chung wasn't actually even represented. It was through the friend who was represented at CAA. She read the thing. She was an up and coming, hungry manager, agent. This is a great testimony for screenwriters and filmmakers. This was a real passion project for him that he developed over years, shot in 28 days for $2 million. Didn't know that. That's amazing.
Well,
Right.
And then
go ahead,
other
Kenny.
thing real quick is they didn't, the production value was still high. They still shot on a Alexa Mini. They still used Panavision vintage lenses. So they put the money where it counted. The casting was obviously perfect. So it's what you can do. You can do a lot when you have inspired, passionate, zealous storytellers.
And Brad Pitt getting behind a story like this is fantastic,
Brilliant. Right. Give us a quick thought, bro. What last thoughts do you want to give to filmmakers, artists, actors, dancers, screenwriters out there, man? Thoughts?
Yeah, I think, I was just reading some behind the scenes stuff too. And it was interesting. The director said that he thought this would be his last film he'd ever make because it's so hard to make a film nowadays. So he said, it's interesting. He made a film about himself then, right? And what he didn't do is go to the moon, right? He didn't just everything to the wall. He actually played it subtle, and he actually put his whole life in this film, and he did it like we've said it 100 times here. Is he put everything, like David said, the 80 memories of everything accumulated into kind of what his life was, into like maybe what we call his last hurrah, really.
Right.
And it worked, right? And I think for me, it spoke when I read that. I realized I'm like, it is very important as filmmakers that we always stay true to who we are, because there's so many voices, especially when you're at a level where you're trying to make it, where you're waiting for that break, right? And we've all been there. This is just how the industry works, but the ability to kind of stay consistent in the way that you're going to tell the stories, to choose one thing and just make that the target, versus taking pressure maybe from, I want a studio to pick this up, or whatever, to kind of making it what people maybe would expect, and choosing to stay true to who he was. I think I was really impressed by that, because I think, like we said, over and over again this morning, that is the heart that comes through the film.
Yeah.
That is the disruptive part, is that it's like what Bill Johnson says, you can't deny, when a man tells you a testimony, you can't deny whether it's true or not. And I think when you have so much humanity, that's just, you're touching on the realness of human life experience. You can't turn your eye away because like, oh, that's actually what someone's experienced. So there's always something to pick up.
Yeah, it's good.
You know, Stephen Yeun, the actor from The Walking Dead, who played the dad, Isaac, interesting name if you think about it. He talked about how he had to move past, you know, because he's Korean American himself, and he talked about how he had to go past his own judgment of his father and his father's generation in order to play his father. And he talked about the experience about, I believe, actually, no, it was the director, and this particular, it was both the director and Stephen, the director and the actor who played the father, that had these experiences with their next generation. Stephen talked about how he had to get past judgment of his own father to become his father, which I just think is a profound statement in and of itself. And then Lee Chung talked about how he actually got to watch, because it premiered at Sundance, he got to watch the film side by side with his father. Now, I don't know if it's necessarily an Asian thing. I think it's just an immigrant culture, and a different generations show affection or don't show affection in different ways. And he talked about how his father just put a hand on his shoulder, and then he put a hand on his father's shoulder, and then the father grabbed him by both arms and shoulders, and then they just began to weep together. And then I was like, holy moly, that is just a deep, deep experience. That's what happens with True Art. Fab, we're about to wrap up, man. Would you pray us? Would you activate us over this next break before? Because I'm about to session 3, guys. You're going to be joining me here in about 5 to 10 minutes, where I'm going to be live workshopping 2 to 3 log lines. If you're feeling a stir in your heart, if Holy Spirit is prompting you to take that leap, I want you to reach out to Ella, our admissions counselor, here on chat or via email, bethelconservatory.com. because we want to help you start your creative journey. Fab, would you bless us, man?
Yeah, you know what? At times when we write a story, we think it's only going to heal the audience, but it doesn't. It can heal the writer. It can heal the actors that do it. So I want to pray right now that whatever you have in your heart, whatever story God has given you, be faithful, put pen to paper, because not only will you bring healing to people that read the story, that watch the movie, you bring healing to yourself, because God wants to meet you right now in your art. He wants to express who he is through you. And if you don't write it, you might be missing out on being the healing or being the catalyst, that disruptive storyteller to somebody else who's meant to hear your story. So I release the favor, the creativity, and the power of Jesus wherever you are right now, and say, dream, breathe him in, take the stories from heaven, pull them down, start to write, start to create, start to imagine them. If you can see them, you can have them. Focus on them. Let it manifest in your heart and bring and give birth to this creation in the mighty name of Jesus.
Well said, gentlemen. The only thing I'm more excited to do is to do more of this with you guys. So keep an eye out for BCA's upcoming Kingdom Story podcast. I don't even know what we're going to call it yet, but I'm sure it's going to be incredibly cool. Gentlemen, thank you, each and every one of you, for carrying excellence and Holy Spirit in your craft as brothers and as fathers. Guys, be sure to join us in the next 5 to 10 minutes. Take that quick break, and I want you to rock up to watch me workshop 2 to 3 story summaries or story log lines. These are story seeds of 2 to 3 of your peers. God bless you guys, and see you soon. See you, gents.